All right, well, we might just start. It is nearly 5 past now, so we'll just start. I just wanted to say thank you everyone for attending today for this exciting webinar on emerging weed technologies. So for anyone that doesn't know me, my name's Leah Nugent. So I'm the Rural Agricultural Land Care Facilitator for Gulf Savannah NRM. In short, it's called RALPH. So that's my position here. So basically, I'll be your host today. And yeah, I really hope that you do enjoy the webinar. All right, so I'll do a quick acknowledgement to country. All right, so basically, I just want to say I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands of the Northern Gulf and pay our respects to elders. In particular, I acknowledge the Mullaridji people as traditional custodians of the land we're coming to you from today. To begin with, I just want to let you all know as well that this is actually being recorded, so hopefully no one has any issues with that. As well, if anyone does have any questions for any of the presenters today, if you could just put it down in the chat box, and at the end of the webinar, I'll go through the questions. So that'd be great if you could all do that. All right, so I'll just do a quick introduction of the presenters today. There is a couple that haven't logged on yet, so I'm hoping they will in the next few minutes. But the lineup is as follows. So Michael Walsh, he'll be the first presenter today. So he's a scientist from the University of Sydney, and he'll be talking about weed recognition systems, alternative weed control methods, such as lasers and electrical weeding. So Paul McIntosh is our second speaker, and he's the Northern Region Extension Agronomist from Pulse Australia and Weedsmart, and he'll be talking about weed resistance factors. All right, Jeremy Jones is our third presenter. So he's a machinery rep from Dalby Agricultural Supplies, and he'll be talking about driverless spray equipment. Mareeba Dicarlo is a Biosecurity Officer from the Department of Agriculture and Fisheries, or as everyone normally knows it as DAF. So he'll be speaking about drones, eDNA, biocontrols, seed longevity trials, and encapsulated herbicides. So I'll be doing a little bit of an introduction for each of the speakers before I start as well. So Michael has spent 25 years working on the research and development of alternative weed control technologies aimed at reducing the impact of herbicide resistance on Australian grain cropping systems. Much of his work has been focused on the introduction and use of harvest weed seed control systems to mitigate the impact of resistant weed populations on grain production. More recently, he has commenced research on weed recognition technologies and opportunities for precision weed control in cropping systems. He believes that recent technological advances are creating exciting opportunities for the introduction of new weed control techniques. So I'll hand over to Michael to make his presentation. So I'll just stop sharing my screen now, Michael, and it's all over to you.
All right, thank you very much, Leah, and yeah, welcome everyone. And hopefully you should be able to see that screen being shared.
Yep, yeah.
All right, I'll just convert the presenter view. And get back to the start. Okay. All right, so yeah, as Leah said, it's I think it's pretty exciting times at the moment with the development of novel technologies for weed control. There's a whole suite of things that are occurring that are really going to change the way we control weeds in the future. A lot of the technology development has been focused around the area of enabling weed recognition. So camera technologies coupled with autonomous vehicles, etc., will give us the opportunity to site-specifically control weeds, which again is a fundamental shift in weed control. So what weed recognition enables, as I said, is site-specific weed control, and it's this whole philosophy now of being able to treat the weeds and not the whole paddock. So when we start specifically targeting weeds, that gives us the chance to reduce our inputs substantially. So our weed control costs can be reduced by between 40 to 90%, depending on the weed density, of course. So the exciting opportunities as far as new weed control options go are that there's a potential for the use of new herbicides that may have been too expensive to use on a whole field basis. But for me as a weed scientist, I think the really exciting aspect is the potential for using alternative technologies, which I'll talk about in a minute or two. So just as a bit of a general background, what weed recognition is being able to look at weeds with a camera. So you can see in this cropping scenario here on the left that there's wheat and there's weeds, and then with some fairly sophisticated computer programming, you can identify not only the weeds, but the weed species and individual weed plants for potential targeting. Site-specific weed control is not new. So we've been using optical sensing technologies to detect the reflectance of green plants in fallow fields for subsequent spot spraying treatment. So we've had the Weed It and the Weed Seeker, and more recently the Weed Kipper as opportunities for specifically targeting weeds with those sensing technologies in the past. But now we're transitioning into camera-based weed recognition, so digital imagery being used to recognise plants in fallow and in cropping fields. And so there's quite a few companies who are developing the camera-based spraying systems. So these are conventional booms, large booms that have got camera systems mounted on them. They have individually controlled nozzles so that whenever a weed is detected by the camera system, the respective nozzles are triggered to apply a site-specific herbicide treatment. We believe that these technologies will be perfect for early season post-emergence weed control in crops. They have the potential for controlling both high and low weed density, particularly if there's the combination of spot and blanket spraying treatments. Early season weed control requires large areas to be controlled in a very short period of time, so typically around 3,000 hectares in 3 or 4 weeks. It's an open canopy cropping system at that stage, which means that the cameras can see the weeds, so they can recognise them, and then, as I said, trigger the respective nozzles. So now thinking about alternative weed control options, and there are a lot of them have been looked at over the previous decades, from mechanical, herbicide, mulch and thermal categories. So on the graph on the left here, on the y-axis, we've got energy consumption in megajoules per hectare, and we've got various weed control options on the x-axis. So we looked at energy consumption as a way of actually comparing the energy cost of these weed control treatments, which does relate to a dollar value. So when these treatments are applied as whole field treatments, they are quite energy expensive. The mechanical ones tend to be cheaper. The herbicide is relatively cheap energy-wise, and then the thermal treatments and the mulch treatments are very expensive. So this is a log axis scale on the y-axis there. So thermal treatments are 10-fold higher in terms of energy requirements compared to mechanical and herbicide-based treatments. So that's for whole field treatments. With weed recognition, and you start applying these treatments site-specifically, so on the right-hand side figure now, we're looking at just a few of the selected treatments that can be applied site-specifically. Again, we've got energy requirements, energy consumption, in megajoules per hectare, but the scale is much smaller now, so it maximises at about 200 megajoules per hectare compared to well over 100,000 megajoules per hectare for the left-hand scale, for the left-hand figure. And there's not a lot of difference in energy requirement between thermal, herbicide and mechanical-based treatments. And so that means that these alternatives, the alternative mechanical and thermal treatments, become quite comparable cost-wise compared to a traditional herbicide treatment. So that's encouraging. So as I indicated, there's dozens of alternative weed control treatments, and it's a bit of a challenge to figure out which ones we want to focus on for development as commercial treatments in our large-scale cropping systems. Most of the weed control options have been developed to some extent, but they tend to be used on small-scale horticultural areas if they're used at all. So we've looked at some of these options, or we've looked at these options and settled on 5 specific treatments that we want to further investigate. And so these are treatments: laser weeding, abrasive grits, electrical weeding, and water jet cutting. That can be specifically applied to weed plants or weed plant parts. So they can be quite precise with their application, which means that they can be even more economically viable. So a little bit more about those particular treatments. So laser weeding has a weed recognition requirement. So going from left to right here, so laser weeding in this top row requires the recognition of the plant growing points, plant stems or plant bases, because that's what lasers can be directed to target. With very high levels of precision, they can be used for either burning those plant parts, or they can have a cutting action. So you can cut the plants off, or you can cut through them, or you can just burn the growing points. For electrical weeding, you need to be able to recognise the weeds to apply the electrical weeding target. High precision, and with electrical weeding, there is a root effect. So the electrical current will go down through the leaves and into the roots. So it can control the roots as well as the leaves. For water jet cutting, it's high pressure or very high pressure water jet is applied to plant stems, plant base, with the idea of cutting these plants off. So you need to be able to recognise where those stems and bases are. It has a low water use requirement. So based on 5 plants per metre squared that you need to control, you only need a total of 20 litres per hectare to be able to achieve that weed control. And with this approach, there's the opportunity to actually include a herbicide treatment with that water that's being applied under high pressure. So you can have a dual effect with a cutting and herbicide treatment. So abrasive grit is probably the least precise treatment of these 4. It's applied to the whole plant with the idea of just, I guess, abrading off the plant leaves. I guess the novel aspect of this is that you can start using organic substrates. So potentially things like coffee grounds, fertiliser, sand. It can be quite unique, the material that you use to try and control the weeds with this approach. Okay, so a little bit more about the laser weeding work that we've done. These photos are examples of lasers being directed at the growing points of a turnip weed on the left and an annual ryegrass plant on the right. As you can see, they've charcoaled up that growing point quite well, and they've effectively killed the plant. And so that's just an indication of how precise these treatments can be. Just looking at the results from controlling these weeds, turnip weed and annual ryegrass, with increasing intensities of laser treatment. So the numbers along the bottom of the rows of pots here are the energy in joules per millimetre squared. So very low energy requirements can be used to effectively control the seedling stage turnip weed and annual ryegrass plants. What we learned from this preliminary research was that annual ryegrass plants were much easier to control at low energy levels than turnip weed. But as plants grew, the energy requirements quickly escalated to quite high levels. So the larger the plants, the greater the level of energy required to kill them with a laser weeding treatment. In terms of when we think is going to be the best timing for the use of these alternative weed control treatments, we believe it's going to be the late post-emergent stage. So late post-emergence, you're not necessarily trying to kill the plants to prevent more in-crop weed competition. That stage is past. It's more about preventing seed production and seed set for subsequent crops. So your time period is quite extended. So you've got potentially 10 to 12 weeks. The challenge is that you have a closed crop canopy. Hopefully you've got low weed densities after early season weed control. You've still got the same large area to control weeds across, and you'll probably have a range of weed sizes. So we think that the platform that's going to be needed for this weed control opportunity for alternative weed control treatments is an autonomous one that's slowly moving through the fields, round the clock operation, and it's got a shroud that contains a camera and a light source and a weed control effector. So as it's moving through the field, it's looking at wheat and weeds that's recognised as green and red plant material respectively on the right hand side here, and then the red weeds that would be targeted with a weed control treatment. And so that autonomous platform was something that we developed in a previous project at Sydney University. All right, and with that, I think I'll leave it there, Leah. Thank you.
Great, thanks a lot for that, Michael. Sorry, we just had a couple little issues in the background there. Just a couple of presenters haven't turned up, but what I'll do, just to give them a bit of time, hopefully, is I'll just go straight through to Mario, if that's okay, Mario, with you.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, great. All right, sorry about that, everyone. Fingers crossed they will turn up. Might just be a little bit of a different order, that's all. All right, so Mario Dicarlo is currently employed as a Biosecurity Officer by Biosecurity Queensland and works in the Invasive Plants and Animals Operations Northern Region Business Unit. So the Northern Region Business Unit covers an area from the Burdekin right up to the Torres Strait. Mario's main focus is on the local area, including Cook Shire, Mareeba Shire, and the Tablelands. So I'll now pass over to Mario, and he can give us a talk about drones, eDNA, and everything else that's exciting.
All right, so yeah, I'm Mario Dicarlo. So I work for the Department of Agriculture and Fisheries, Biosecurity Queensland. A bit about me. So I grew up in Dimbulah, far north Queensland, completed my senior years of school in Mareeba, and then went to university down the hill in JCU Cairns. So I started my career working for the National Tropical Weeds Eradication Program, and slowly over the years have climbed the ladder and continued on this pathway. So in my presentation today, I'll give you a brief overview of who my team is and what we do as a business unit. I'll then run you through some of our priority projects and explain how advancements in technology are helping us. Now, I've also included a few slides from our BQ research team towards the end of the presentation, but any questions on them, I'm happy to have a go at answering, but I might have to clarify and get back to you at a later date. Who we are. So we fall under the umbrella of the Department of Agriculture and Fisheries, Biosecurity Queensland. From here, we branch off further into our business unit, Invasive Plants and Animals. So other business units within BQ that you might have come across before include Animal Biosecurity and Welfare and Plant Biosecurity and Product Integrity. So branching off further again, our unit is Operations, and the area we cover is North Region. So nice and clear, good government structure. As Leah said previously, so North Region in a nutshell is from the Burdekin all the way across to the Gulf of Carpentaria and the NT border, and then right up to the Torres Strait. So the area that we cover is approximately 40% of the state of Queensland and includes 2/3 of the Queensland coastline. So the team that I'm part of, so my boss, Robert Coburn's based in Townsville. And from there, we have offices based in Cairns, South Johnston, Mareeba, and Charters Towers. So we're currently recruiting for another officer out of Charters Towers. So if you know anyone interested, I think the job was advertised last week. A self-plug for the team. what we do, so the piece of legislation which underpins everything that we do is the Biosecurity Act 2014. So it provides the powers for us to assist in the regulation of invasive biosecurity matter. So they can be plants, animals, noxious fish, marine animals, or plant pests. So this diagram, it's commonly referred to as the invasion curve. So the priority species which we work on are mostly at the front of the invasion curve at either the prevention or the eradication stage. Occasionally we do work on priorities in the containment stage, but usually only as we're transitioning them towards another stakeholder. So the types of work which we carry out at the front of the invasion curve include sentinel surveillance, proof of freedom surveillance, investigation and enforcement, survey and control, and education. So we're guided by policies, and species which we target have been identified as being feasible to eradicate from or pose a significant threat to Queensland. So these have been assessed in consultation with relevant stakeholders. So now into the technology, who we are and what we do. So Mexican bean tree, or Cecropia, is an eradication target in Queensland. It's native to tropical America and is spread by birds and bats. It's a fast-growing pioneer species, which is quick to colonize disturbed sites and cyclone-damaged forests. In North Region, we have 11 sites where the tree currently is or has been managed. Usually surveillance and management for this particular species is carried out on ground. So a buffer zone will be drawn around a flowering or fruiting plant, and that area will be covered in an emu parade fashion with people roughly 10 meters apart in a survey line. In difficult terrain, a single person usually covers 1 to 2 hectares in a working day. So previously manned aerial flights were also utilized as a surveillance tool to cover the extended buffer zones where, we usually couldn't get to on foot. But after 2 crashes, they were no longer deemed a safe tool for surveillance. So about 2.5 years ago now, we delved into the use of drones to replace these manned aerial flights. And this step has drastically changed how we manage Cecropia as an eradication target in North Region. So now, instead of emu parading through an area, we utilize drone deploy and map out an area for the drone to capture aerial imagery. So this imagery is then stitched together online. So in the next slide here is a picture of stitched together imagery. So it's stitched together online and reviewed by officers to identify Cecropia in the area. So these are all geo-referenced, the imagery. So once the Cecropia has been identified online, we take the GPS points and upload them to our phones and GPS units and navigate to the individual plants for control efforts. So instead of walking 300 hectares, we fly 300 hectares and just single file into these plants. So this revised process has more than quartered the amount of time it takes to carry out survey and control in an area, which is huge. So there's much less risk involved. You're out in the field less, so exposed to the elements less. It's been a big step. So we did initially look into the use of artificial intelligence, or AI, to identify the plants in the aerial imagery that we were feeding into the system. But the issue we ran into early on was that we didn't have a big enough photo bank for the AI to learn what it was looking for. So this is something which we're hoping to get up and running in the near future once we've built up our photo bank. Cecropia is the perfect species for this type of surveillance, given it is a pioneer species with a large leaf that is easily identifiable from the air. So it's provided an excellent platform for us to build our capabilities from. So we've started using this technology on some of our other priority targets, or lending a hand to local governments for some of their targets. But the issue that we found is we've hit our limit, so to speak, with the drone that we currently have, which is just a off-the-shelf Phantom 4 Pro version 2. So the issue that we have, that in order to get high enough quality pictures to identify the species, we need to fly too low, which isn't a viable option when you've got trees, power lines, and whatnot around. So the solution that we've come up with is we need to get a bigger drone with a better camera that'll allow us to take much better imagery from a safe height. So we've just finished the procurement paperwork on that. So hopefully we'll have that all in the near future. So compliance and enforcement is another area of work which we take part in. Compliance is used by a team as a way to curb the trade of restricted and prohibited invasive species within the community. So this is often done through nursery visits, random yard checks or surveys of a town, visits to weekend markets, or the monitoring of online trading platforms such as Facebook Marketplace or Gumtree. So some of the species that we target are cactus, and also we call them Asian market vegetables. So charom, water mimosa, Limnacaris flava, and soap pod. So usually the monitoring of online trading platforms would involve a biosecurity officer spending a few hours a week trawling through the online listings in area using keywords to search. Recently, however, we teamed up with the University of Adelaide and developed what's called a web scraping tool. So the web scraping tool essentially does the trawling for us. So we give it a set of keywords to look for, and it provides us at the end of the day or the end of the week, whenever you set it up, with a list of advertising containing those keywords. So this tool basically allows us to spend more time investigating and out in the field rather than scrolling through ads on Facebook and Gumtree. That's been a pretty useful tool for us. So we also do a bit of exotic reptile monitoring, which is we also use the web scraping tool for. Obviously, there's a whole online black market for the sale of these sort of species. That's helped us quite a bit in that realm. But in terms of aquatic species, such as red-eared slider turtles or a lot of the other turtles here, we've started moving towards eDNA, which is still very untested. But yeah, theoretically, it'd provide us with the ability to take a water sample and determine the presence or absence of a pest, plant, or animal in the water body. So it could potentially be huge. It's a very cheap and effective test. But the catch is that with this technology, you need a DNA profile or marker developed to test your sample against. And there really hasn't been enough research done to determine exactly how long the DNA lasts in the water. So, would you detect a plant that's 1 kilometre away? Or if there's a tilapia in this part of the stream, how far does the DNA travel down? So, yeah, those are still unanswered. So green pests, so eDNA is also helping us in this realm. So we've set up a lot of sentinel surveillance at ports all through the Gulf of Carpentaria and along the east coast, where we put out these wonderful settlement arrays. So they've got plates on them. And in the past, we'd have to take the whole perspex plate off, freeze them all the way from, it'd be Corumba. They'd have to travel all the way to Brisbane, frozen solid. And yeah, recently we've been using eDNA, where they scrape off the barnacles, blend it all up, and yeah, it's much quicker, more effective. Exotic amphibians, in particular, the Asian spine toad, are one of our priority targets, which we're trying to prevent from establishing in Queensland. So these species are known to hitch rides on shipping containers and all sorts of stuff coming from overseas. So we monitor major ports in Cairns, Townsville, Mackay, and Brisbane, and we do this through the use of, they're actually called toadinator traps, which we've altered to use the Asian spine toad's mating call instead of the cane toad. So we haven't had a detection of an Asian spine toad yet, but it's a really good layer of protection. And we'll move into EQ Research. So EQ Research, they're based out at Charters Towers and the Eco Sciences precinct in Brisbane. So they do a lot of your biocontrol. So they bring them in, rear them, get them ready to send out to the public. One of their latest projects, so I still don't have any data on it, is their encapsulated herbicide trials. So they've been trialing them on, neem trees. We've done a few on Cecropia. Lots of different species, and they do seem to be very effective. In Charters, what they usually focus on is time to maturity and seed bank persistence for all of our big eradication targets. So how long it takes a plant to go from a seed on the ground to seeding, and how long does the seed bank last in the ground. So that sort of provides our timeframes for eradication targets, whether we're going back for 3 years or 30 years. So the way that they do that is through burial trials. So they'll bury up to 30,000 seeds in the ground at different depths, different soil types, and they dig them up periodically. So could be once a year, every 3 years, and they basically work out how many of the buried seeds germinate until they get to what they call is P50, which means that there's less than 50% viability in the seed. So they've done this for quite a few species over the years, as you can see up here. So neem tree, stevia, mesquite, sickle pod, and obviously all these at the far end here are hard-coated seeds that are going to survive for a long time in the soil. So the big advancement in this technology is controlled aging lab tests. So usually these buried seed trials, they can go for 10 to 15 years. There's a lot of variables that go on over the years. So controlled aging in the lab basically allows us to turn a 10-year test into a year, which is a huge advancement. But this is also pretty new because they're basically comparing seed trials that they've already got with controlled aging lab tests. So working out where it all fits in and how reliable it all is. But if it does prove to be reliable, it'll be a huge tool to have up our sleeve. So, if there's a new incursion, we don't have to wait 30 years to work out how long the seed's going to last in the soil. We can work it out in less than a year. That's about it from EQ DAF. Happy to answer any questions.
Great, thanks a lot for that, Mario. That was awesome. So just to to sort of update everyone, there is 2 presenters. I'm not sure why it haven't logged on. So what I'll do is I'll just jump straight to the questions. I'm really sorry about that. So I do have one question here. All right, so this one's from Jody. She said, thanks for the presentation, Michael. Definitely an exciting area of agriculture. And she was wanting to know how long you anticipate it might be until the automated units, such as the one you showed at the end of your presentation, are commercially available.
That's the million-dollar question, Jody. So the platforms themselves, so the robots, I believe you could buy them last year, but I think they're still available. The important bits that go on the robots are not commercially available as a unit yet. So, you can buy all the bits and pieces and put them together, but they haven't been tried and tested in the commercial world. And that's the stage we're at the moment, is that we're trying to establish the weed recognition capability and also confirm the weed control efficacy of things like the laser treatments, the water jet cutting, etc. So, and in terms of time frame, it all comes down to funding. So, with availability of funding, you can upscale these activities. At the moment, funding's pretty tight, so it's a rather restricted pace of action.
Thanks for that. Does that answer your question, Jody?
Yes, thanks. That was great.
Yeah, and there is a second part to that. Sorry, we've got part B. So what are the major challenges you see for such innovations being rolled out in regional areas such as the Gulf? So that's from Jody as well.
Yeah, I'll possibly answer that with the last question. So the major challenges are really just ground truthing the capability of these systems in the different regions. So Mario sort of indicated that you need good data or weed imagery for accurate weed recognition, and that's true. So wherever you have a weed control scenario that you want good weed recognition for, you have to collect the imagery, then train the software algorithm on that collected imagery to then develop the recognition capability. So it's data collection, which is pretty mundane, boring, but needs to be done. It's essential. And then the ground truthing and validation activities.
Okay, great. And Jody has one for Mario as well. So Mario, could the eDNA also be used to locate habitats of threatened species as well?
Yeah, I'd say so. It'd all just, yeah, it's obviously not what we're looking for, but it could definitely be utilized in that space. So yeah, we use it more for aquatic species because water samples are very easy to collect. But yeah, I definitely think it could be used in that space.
Okay, great. All right. Well, so does anyone else have any questions while we're going that they haven't put in the chat box yet? All right. So after moving to Australia in 2013, Jeremy began introducing broadacre growers to optical spraying technology. Over the past 10 years, he's set up over 200 spraying systems on farms with Weedit and has now started integrating his Weedit sprayers into driverless spraying systems with Swarm Farm robotics. So I'll now hand over to Jeremy, who will share his screen in a minute. Yeah,
excellent.
great. Okay,
All right, thanks, Leah. Oh,
Yeah.
sorry guys, I got roped into coaching a kid's softball thing and selection day today, and it's just run a little longer, so I've just snuck away. But no, thanks for taking the time and having me in here today. We've done a lot with Weighted on the Darling Downs over a number of years, probably really the last 8 years. We've seen substantial growth for a number of reasons, and as of probably about 12 months ago, I've started my own business, Darling Down Spray Tech, where we've just essentially focused on Weighted retrofits onto existing machines, the sales of new big trailing machines, and a lot with the Swarm Farm robotics implications. So I'll cover all of that now. So the main reason that a lot of people were looking to get into optical spraying, I guess, was hard to control weeds. So we've focused on a lot of different ways of doing that. There's 3 different types of systems that are essentially in the market right now. Near infrared technology sensors like your Weedit Quadro or WeedSeeker 2, they've been around for a number of years, basically using a built-in light source and looking at reflectance on weeds. So really targeting growing plants, living plant matter. They just come over top when they get the reflectance from chlorophyll in the plant, turns on a nozzle in behind it, sprays the weed. Camera-based sprayers have come out and been pretty popular really over the last couple of years as you look at the introduction of bilberry. A lot of green on green applications with their John Deere See and Spray, and even autoweed as it's been developed up in Townsville. Drones with the same camera-based technology, also very, very good. In-farm out of Gundawindi, Pinpoint Ag was one that floated around for a long time, and really I'd say single shot from the single family out of south of Walgett, Canamble area has probably taken off as one of the leaders in that camera-based market. A lot of different benefits that we're seeing from optical spraying. It's not so much just on saving money, it's controlling those hard to kill weeds. So feathertop, rhodes grass, fleabane, milk thistles, everything's been a problem. And the agronomists that I've worked with were getting frustrated that they recommend a double knock, not kill everything, come back with the 3rd spray, and sometimes not even kill all the weeds then. So it out of frustration really is what we saw a lot of the uptake of optical spraying. Chemical savings has been definitely an added bonus. It's a big investment and oftentimes a new investment on the farm. So it's not like you're trading off anything to get into a camera sprayer. It's become a necessary machine. Chemical rotation. very big thing. I mean, I'm sure Paul McIntosh would have talked about what they're doing with different chemistries and, looking at getting away from the alliance on glyphosate. But, if the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results. So this has allowed us to introduce a lot of chemistries like glufosinate, such as the Bifo or Basta, and a lot of higher end chemistries that we'd never be using in these broadacre applications. But because they are expensive and they're a different mode of action, and we're essentially usually spraying 3 to 5% of the paddock, it's made it a very good investment as we look to get away from traditional Gly 2,4-D applications. Water use reduction through the drought was a massive thing. A lot of guys saying they would have been out of water, out of rainwater, had they not been able to just get away with camera spraying and the water savings with that. And reduce seed set. That's been a big thing, and we focus on that a lot with the people we deal with around here. Anybody can deal with big patches of weeds. You can go out, you can chip them, you can burn them, you can do whatever. It's that single rogue weed that grows 4 inches tall and sets seeds again. That becomes your next patch. So you're constantly chasing your tail. Whereas, with the optical sprayers, we're killing everything that's out there, targeting 99%, weed control, maybe higher in some instances. We might be getting it all. But essentially we are stopping the seed set, and that's really helping us get ahead of these hard to kill weeds. In the beginning, I was approached by an agronomist out of St. George area when I was with Croplands, and he just said, we're losing the battle with feathertop out here, and we see weeded as a real tool for that. And we took a number of growers down through a tour in around Adelaide and some areas in the Barossa, and we looked at some machines that had been running in the paddock for a couple of years, and from that, the uptake was great. We sold 4 of these 36-meter machines like is on the screen now, out into that Surat area. And we essentially stopped there. We ran those 4 machines for around 12 months. And we learned a lot. We didn't have a parts book. We didn't have a lot of experience with them. But boy, oh boy, we learned a lot through some of those tough summers in Surat. So following up on that, the uptake was just massive. And what we found is that you'd have some innovative growers in every region. You get 1 or 2 in each region. A lot of people look over the fence. They have their own little days with neighbors. And through all that kind of testing, the benefits really help them sell themselves. So as much as I like to say I'm a great salesman, I've done great work, I think the machines have done a lot of the work themselves. We just have to make sure we set them up right and let them do what they do. So weeded itself, I guess, to look at what we're doing, it's basically looking at reflectance. So as the camera travels across, it picks up chlorophyll in the plant, looking at the reflectance of the light source bouncing back. And once we program it, the nozzle will come right over the weed. Usually sprays 200 or 300 mil in front of the weed, sprays across the weed, and then stops 200 or 300 mil after. So very targeted application. We can angle the cameras. We prefer not to, but let's just run the camera closer to the nozzle. Just makes it easier to set up, and especially as we look at retrofitting on the self-propelleds, it just helps everything fit in a little better. But generally, what we want to see out of cameras, whether they're sensor-based like the Weed It and the Weed Seeker or anything else, is as little forward angle as we can. Some of the new camera systems that are coming out now are up to 65 degrees forward facing. So if you grow crops like sorghum or corn, just be mindful that shading is going to be a massive problem as we target small weeds in the plant row. Weeded itself has 4 main spraying systems. So it's just got your traditional spot spray mode where it comes to the weed, turns on, sprays at full water rate. But we have 3 PWM spraying options as well now. So we've got their spot spraying mode where we can set the rate per nozzle in the console. So if we don't need the big water like we do with gramoxone or glufosinate, we can cut the water rate back with 2,4-D or Gly applications where we don't need a lot of water, and it just helps that smaller tank last a lot longer and be a little more efficient. We can also turn the Weed It now into a full cover spray, so we can do a full blanket spray. We just set the spray rate in the console again. It just pulses, and we turn it into a blanket sprayer. And one of the recent things we've been doing a lot of work with is the dual function spraying, where it can put out a light blanket rate, but also spike to high rates when weeds are detected. So that's often handy when we're putting out residuals or even just Gly applications to make sure we're getting higher rates on the weeds that are already there. The big thing that you have to look at with optical spraying is really the camera, the nozzle width of the nozzle that you're using. Our traditional nozzle is a 40-degree O3 nozzle, and that's just what we're going to look at here just to give you an idea of what that application rate would be per nozzle. So if we look at Weedmaster DST, just because it is on the label for optical spot spraying, As a nozzle comes on over a single plant, single nozzle fires, we've just applied a 3.5 liter chemical rate over a 500 mil width, maybe slightly over. And with that 100 liter water equivalent, we've hit that weed with 3.5 liters of glyphosate equivalent. So a very high rate. If the weed's a little bit bigger, or a second one right beside it, second nozzle comes on. Because we don't have a rate controller, essentially nozzles overlapping is our rate controller. So bigger weeds will get a bigger dosage. So if 2 nozzles spraying, we've increased our overall chemical application through that area to 5 liters equivalent. But you'll notice that darker green area in the middle where it does overlap. That's an area where we're applying 7 liters per hectare equivalent of gly. So a bigger flea bait plant, anything like that, it's getting a double dose of water. It's also getting a double dose of that chemical, so that 7 liter hit. Third nozzle comes on, big old milk thistle or something. It's just going through a couple applications. If it comes up in the middle of that triple overlap, we've hit it with 3 times the rate. It's just been hit with 10.5 liters of gly equivalent on a very high water rate. So we're getting very good coverage. So on something like that, 3 nozzles coming on, it's going to absolutely dose that plant top to bottom. And that ensures that that plant is not going to be surviving that application. New Farm's done a lot of work with us over the years for registration of optical spot spraying with their chemistries. So Weedmaster, DST, Amatrol, Alliance, all those, as well as glufosinate or their BIFO, which has been a very useful chemical for us up here with its new mode of action. So it's been a very good feature for us to work with, and very good for covering some of those hard to kill weeds, and often controlling everything we want to in one pass. So this is what I usually come back to due to the rising cost of ammunition, no longer providing warning shots. So, we're not just going to hit it with a light rate of something just to scare it. We're going to go out there and we're going to clean them up as we get over them. And traditionally, I would say that, most growers are out with their weed hits every 4 to 6 weeks. So it's not that we're essentially looking at waiting for weed growth. If we've got 1% weed growth coming out there, it's just the time, it's a bit of fuel. But we roll across it, and just to make sure that none of these weeds are going to get to the point of setting seed. So it really does come back to almost a calendar type spray. We also spend a lot of time looking at this chart. According to New Farm, the optimum spraying period is around 5 hours a day. Traditionally, it could be different, but we run into problems with inversion, and oftentimes people not using the right nozzles, spray quality, and a lot of night spraying is done, whether it gets too hot through the day, and guys have a lot of hectares to get across. So what this does is it opens up the window for optical spraying with our low drift nozzles, which are now registered. So we can run an extremely coarse droplet to ensure that we minimize the drift, especially when we're looking at these higher rates of these chemistries. But in a lot of cases, it's eliminating the need to mix in 2,4-D. We're using contact herbicides that maybe aren't as prone to drift, or definitely won't be causing the damage if any of it does drift away. Retrofits have become very popular. As we look at the weed at Quadro, you can see some of the cameras mounted up there along that boom. We set that one up in Toowoomba, and it's now at Surat. So the camera itself is 680 grams. Each camera covers 4 nozzles in behind it on 250 mil spacing. So it does really roll across to what a lot of machines are already plumbed at. So it makes that retrofit system work very, very seamlessly. And because it's a lightweight camera, we can run lighter weight brackets, and it just makes it a lot easier to retrofit those onto existing machines. A great partnership that we've developed on the Downs has been, not only with the Croplands group with their weighted cameras they provided us, but Rasmussen Brothers Engineering has been building linkage type sprayers to go on behind the Swarm Farm robots, and Swarm Farm themselves. We've done a lot of work together in getting their safety gear on machines, making sure everything's set up properly, and ensuring that we're really fitting in with the requirements for weight and size and safety gear going on it, because there is a lot of that required. So it's been a good opportunity to have these 3 small companies working in together. That robot there, that's one of the first ones that Andrew had built up at Guindy. He brought that one into the Cotton Conference many years ago. It was on a 2-meter wheel track, little 500-liter tank, 8-meter boom. And I remember Andrew saying to everybody there that, people won't care if it's not on controlled traffic. It's lightweight. It's, it ticks a lot of boxes. So that's what he was going to build. And we found out pretty quickly that, that really wasn't what the market was looking for. They wanted a 3-meter wheel track. They wanted a 12-meter boom, a little bigger capacity so it could run a little longer. But overall, we're looking at around a 2.5 ton robot with carrying capacity of around 2 ton, although we have put up to 2,000 liter tanks on them now. So just like everything, we do go a little bit bigger. Fuel tank of around 200 liters, and that'll give you autonomous operation for around 2 days. So yeah, very good amount of spraying can get done across that time with a 12-meter boom. 75 horsepower Hatz diesel engine. Again, it just floats along, and we definitely run bigger tires on them now, a little better flotation. So even after a rain event, if you can get around in a side-by-side across your property, this sprayer will go out there and hardly leave a mark. So it is one of the lightest machines, and usually the first thing to get out there and get back to work. As you can see at the bottom, there's a lot of things that they offer for their safety gear on it. So 3D optical detection in sensors on the front of the machine shines out a bit of a web out in front. And if anything distorts that web, of course you can't see it, but the sensors pick it up. If anything distorts it, it automatically stops. Then sends you a warning on your app that the robot has stopped. You can log in, look through the camera at the front of the machine, see if there's something there. Maybe that'll remind you where you've parked your Land Cruiser or something like that. And then yeah, you can decide whether to start the machine and send it off again. It's got a safety bumper in the front, so if the obstacle detection does fail for any reason, the bumper will stop it. We put a GPS geofence around the paddock, so if any part of that machine exits that geofence, the machine automatically stops. And it's got 4 e-stops around the side, so if something does happen where you want to stop it in a hurry, you hit one of these buttons, it automatically stops. So a lot of safety's gone into it. But what most people say when they look at the robot is, what's to stop this thing from running across the highway and hitting a school bus? I don't know what's always a school bus that it's going to hit, but that's usually the question. But physically, this thing should not leave a paddock. It hasn't happened yet, but you know, I don't expect it to, with the amount of features that are built into it to stop it. So it's become a very useful tool for growers here. In the case of a lot of big growers, it's not replacing a 36-meter machine, but rather than running it out every 4 to 6 weeks, having somebody sit on it for 2 weeks while they cover all the country again, it just gives you that option to keep a robot floating around all the time. It covers around 10 hectares an hour with a 12-meter boom on it. It can run 24 hours a day if it runs within the weather parameters that you set. So it's just a good secondary tool for growers to utilize to cover some additional country. The new robots are available on a 3-year lease, so it's something that you lease, you don't own. They look at it that it's like a cell phone. You know, who doesn't have a couple extra mobile phones sitting at home that just have outdated technology and not a lot of use for? So we've found that that it's a good way to get into it with the lease. You purchase the implement to go on the back, but after that 3-year lease, you turn it back to Swarm Farm. If you want to continue, they'll give you something new to go with. So you know you've got the newest obstacle detection, the newest computers on it. So if anything does need to be replaced, it's all new technology. Operators responsible for just the routine maintenance. So oil, fuel, tires, and grease seem to be the main things. And outside of that, if anything else just happens to not work on it, you're going to be completely covered by the guys from Swarm Farm. And they've done really well in investing in people lately. So where we do have a lot of machines coming through, they're investing in service people. We've got 4 people based in Toowoomba now, and I think as we continue to move the amount of robots that we are, especially in the different areas, they'll look to invest in other regions as well. So it's been a lot of fun to be a part of that. So over 30 robots still running with weighted systems in the country, whether it's as small as 9-meter bars that we've built, or up to now 24-meter trailers that are available through both ourselves with the Croplands trailer, or Hayes is building one. Our partners at RBE, we're working together on an 18-meter trailer to go behind the robots as well. We're just looking to fill the gap with a very good purpose-built machine that'll cover a lot of these areas that people are looking to get into, and 18 seems to be a pretty good fit. But we know the 24s, they go around very well. Or the 12, sorry, very lightweight, 3 sensors on it for height control. So it's maintaining that optimum spray speed, height all the time. And it's been a very, very efficient thing for growers to use. Most of them that we have out there, it's now growers going into multiples. So we had that first round that invested, and now some of them have their second, and some are now even going into their third robot. So we're quite excited about what the future holds in this space, especially around the optical spraying, but also looking at some stuff through tillage, mowings, Even in horticulture, there's a lot of applications there that's going to suit us for. So that's yeah, that's really all I wanted to cover with the optical spraying and the swarm farm stuff. Is there any questions with that?
I don't think so. Thanks a lot for that. That's great, Jeremy. Yeah, no, that was very, very interesting. So as I said, yeah, if anyone does have any questions, just put them down in the chat box and we'll still read them out. So we have actually had Paul join us, so hopefully no one wants to run away just yet. Hi, Paul. How are you?
Hey, Leo. I'm a bit better now that I'm on the screen. There was a bit of a panic there for electronic means for a little while, but whew, all is good. I'm sorry I missed the rest of it, Leah.
That's okay. I'm glad to see that you're here, so that's good. So I'll just do a little bit of a intro for you just before you start. That's okay. So basically, Paul is a 4-decade experienced broadacre agronomist whose current dual roles are in Pulse Australia and Weedsmart since 2015. These industry positions have seen him cover all of Queensland and the central and northern regions of New South Wales for advising in pulse agronomy and herbicide resistance issues. So I'll now hand over to Paul to talk about weed resistance and how he contributed to the fact. So thanks, Paul.
I used to think I had this down reasonably well, but obviously I haven't.
That's okay.
Anyhow, that's what
Everyone's
happens when
hanging
everything
on,
goes
so.
wrong. I bring you greetings, everybody, from downtown Newcastle. Maybe that's the reason we got here a couple of hours ago. And so I'm speaking to you from Newcastle about things that go on in the Gulf and the northern region. And yes, that's a black screen because we're just going to talk about resistance and what it might look like in your area, in your region in the future sort of stuff. So that's what we're going to talk about what resistance is. And it goes across not only weeds, but also goes across insects and disease too, which is a scary thing to consider. And then we'll talk a bit about some of the aspects of resistance and some of why we're in this position and what you have to look out for in the north there about resistance, because Paul McIntosh made a goose of himself, and I'll explain that story too. So let's have a look at what we got. So I work for Weedsmart, which is the practical voice of weed control in Australia. We've got the ARI, Australian Herbicide Resistance Initiative, out of Perth, where Michael Walsh was there quite some time ago. And they do the really technical stuff and lots of trials and get into reasons why resistance. There's quite a few of us, there's 6 of us in Australia do the practical part, and I'm the part based in Toowoomba to do the northern region. And these are some of our stakeholders here. These are the companies and the people that back us to talk about resistance, to talk about the practical solutions that we talk about in Weedsmart incessantly in my particular case. And also got the job in Pulse Australia just to keep myself busy when I'm not doing something, when I'm not talking about herbicide resistance. So there's some of our stakeholders, and there's some pretty big companies there, herbicide companies too, I might add. So they're wanting us to make sure that we're very effective in our communications of different practical weed control, so that the herbicides that they have and the herbicide they bring on are going to be effective in the future. Let's have a look at the pesticide resistance is the. I can't quite see. How do you put that thing up a bit more there? Pesticide resistance is the inherited thing of a plant insect disease to survive and reproduce following exposure to a dose of pesticide that would normally be lethal. Now, when I do this in front of people, I go and say, well, here I was spraying a 4-inch milk thistle or south thistle, 20 years ago with a litre a hectare of glyphosate 450. And these days I'm using 1.5 litres, 2 litres. So that resistance is increasing over the time, not just because it's going to die or not going to die, but we're going to look at things called rate creep. And the question I want to pose to everybody is, how do you know or suspect you have pesticide resistance? And that's an interesting one, isn't it? And we'll go right straight back to herbicide resistance. How do you know? Well, of course, the thing doesn't die. And then you just go through all the dramas, don't you? I've sprayed this plant here. I've sprayed this weed here with a herbicide. It normally works. Why didn't it this time? Was the weather too bad? Were the spraying conditions not right? Was my droplet sizes wrong? Was the weather wrong? Was the plant under a bit of stress? Or was it herbicide resistant? And of course, then I talk about rate creep, and this is something else that I've noticed over many years. It's a sneaky problem over time. And it's where the herbicide is still effective, but only when you use higher and higher rates. And I've got so many examples of that in my 40 years of spraying weeds. It's quite amazing that the rate creep situation has come up now as far as an identification and as far as a definition goes. It's because some, due to lower or non-lethal doses, allow some plants with minor genes for resistance to survive. Now, this is part of a few papers. Some people not quite agreeing with what the rate creep, what would you say, definition is, but certainly in some research papers, it's due to this lower or non-lethal doses of herbicide that allows some plants with minor genes for resistance to survive. In other words, we didn't get 90% in the good old days. Oh, sorry, we didn't get 100% in the good old days. If we got 90 or 95% results with a herbicide on a bunch of weeds, we were pretty happy. We were real happy. But maybe in those days, to stop this herbicide resistance, maybe we should have been going for 100%. In other words, kill all those weeds before they can set seed. This non-lethal dose, or the not dying activity by those particular weeds, provides genetic material for future resistant biotypes, particularly non-target site resistance. Target site resistance, as James Hereward says to me, target site is more like a big jump in herbicide rates. It's not a creep, it's a real jump. It either dies or it doesn't die. And why did we cut the rates all those years ago? Why did Paul McIntosh, in all those young days when he was much, much younger, why did he say, oh, we don't need 1.5 litres, we can do it with 1 litre of glyphosate? Well, it's the price, it was the cost of the stuff. Roundup was roughly running at $23 a litre equivalent back in the 1980s. So just compare that, what was when it was 4 and 5, and then it got up to 12 and 14, and now it's going back to 7. But $23 a litre, that was the price of glyphosate back in those early 80s, mid 80s. Why did we cut the rates? To save money per hectare. Otherwise, we've never got zero till off the ground. We might not have any herbicide resistance, but we wouldn't have got much traction with zero till conservation farming either. So target site resistance caused by mutation or alteration of the target site to which our herbicides bind. So inside the plant, these herbicides go to usually one site. If there's a mutation there, the herbicide cannot bind inside the plant, so therefore becomes resistant, and that herbicide is no good on that particular plant species. Non-target site is the alteration of one or more physiological processes, including herbicide absorption through the plant's leaves, translocation that might be interfered with, sequestration is like a bin over there that puts the chemical in the bin, and metabolism, it grows the herbicide out of its system. And we've just found we've got some of that in barnyard grass up in the northern part of Australia, up in the Ord. What other incomplete kill phenomena or reasons can we attribute to herbicide rate creep? Why do we talk about things that don't die? And when we talk about it, what are we going to say? Is it weather? What is it? Well, here's a little bit of a list. Incomplete kill due to size of plant. Paul McIntosh being a Scotsman, he puts 1 litre on when he should have put 1.5 litres on the size of the plants in the paddock. Dry conditions. Oh, we have plenty of them at times. So the plant did not die entirely and recovered to produce seed. We've seen plenty of that, particularly with south thistle. Dusty conditions and wheel tracks. How many times you put the wheel tracks in the same spot and the weeds are there in the same spot? They keep coming back, keep coming back, keep coming back. Poor water quality. We've been hearing about poor water quality for many, many years, about poor water quality, and it's still an issue, believe it or not, particularly in those drier years when people are resorting to bore water. Species not controllable by specific herbicide selections, absolutely. We've got some of those ones around the place. Not necessarily are they going to go herbicide resistance, but certainly they can be made more tolerant of herbicides because they're not very sensitive in the first place. Are there any others? Well, there is. Antagonistic mixtures, and we all know that putting glyphosate and 2,4-D together, particularly with things like south thistle and other weeds, we don't get a very good result, do we? That 2,4-D really interferes with that glyphosate in some of our weeds. So it's a good old product, the old 2,4-D, but it can annoy the heck out of glyphosate. Look at this. This is a photo I took back in 1983, 84. It was a pretty wet time down there. This is on the western downs of Queensland. And look at those ruts there. This is after a big storm one night. This is paddock had just been cultivated, obviously, and it just eroded a whole heap of country. And you can see that you couldn't drive a motorbike over that. You'd fall down there and you'd do some damage. So that was the reason. This soil erosion was one of the major reasons we started on this conservation tillage, zero till farming. This is some work done by Dave Freeban, and Dave worked out how much soil we're losing over the course of a year when they're talking about bare fallow. You can see on the left of screen there, the annual soil loss in tonnes per hectare is 50 tonnes a hectare bare fallow. And the more you've got stubble, the more you've got stubble mulch, the more it's zero till, the more pasture, the soil cover increases. And guess what? We lose less soil. Because if we'd have been doing this for the last 40 years, just go round and around the paddock with a cultivator, big heavy storms, we're going to have no soil left to put our plants in, are we? So that incorporation, that conservation farming, that zero till really has protected our soil. It's let the moisture go in really nicely, and it's got that structure of that soil for us to contribute to still feeding nearly 8 billion people in the world. So first glyphosate-resistant crop, a man-made one, is created in a molecular biologist. And of course, this variety had what they call a TIPS mutation. Now, TIPS mutation is pretty interesting. It's 2 target site mutations. Like, it's bad enough to have a plant with one, but the guys in the lab says, we'll fix this, make it resistant to glyphosate. We'll make 2 target site mutations along the amino acid chain. So they did. So the TIPS mutation became very powerful, the ability to survive up to 57 litres a hectare of glyphosate. And I don't care whether it's 450 or 510 or 540 or 680, it's still a whole lot of heck of glyphosate that this TIPS mutation can give to different plants if it develops. So that was one in the lab, but we didn't think we'd have one of them, or did we? Well, young Adam Jaludin, who Michael and I both know, he had a population of crowsfoot grass from Malaysia around palm trees, and hey presto, this has had a TIPS mutation. And so, it can happen in nature, but that constant spraying of the single mode of action on a plant or a plant out of place, or a weed as we call it, and it can happen here in the crowsfoot grass. So I know you've got crowsfoot grass up in the north there, quite a bit of it around. There's been a bit of suspicion in the burdock, and that's certainly got some resistance to glyphosate, but we don't really want to have a TIPS mutation, do we? But there's usually a TIPS mutation that's got a fitness penalty and they don't grow real well, so that's pretty handy. So crop competition, which is one of the Weedsmart Big 6, wins out, and I'll talk about crop competition in a minute. There it is. That's the Aussie version of crowsfoot grass. So give you some idea what you're staring at. Righto. Paul McIntosh statements when he shouldn't make statements. Afternoon of day 2. Paul's trip to Moree in 1995. I tell you, you should never make sweeping statements, particularly in front of a lot of people. Some might remember for something that happened back in 1995. After the afternoon, day 2, I was sort of a bit over about herbicide resistance. We had none. We had no evidence of herbicide resistance in the north in 1995. And I stood up and said there'll be no herbicide resistance in the northern region because we rotate summer and winter cropping seasons. That's how we've got to have our weeds, with 10 modes of action possible in our herbicide options. What do you reckon about that statement? How do you think I feel about that in 2023? Not so good. So big statement, but how wrong was I? So my concern is that while I say this in 1995 in southern Queensland, what you're going to go through up in the northern region there, and may already be going through it, is that you're going to say we won't have any herbicide resistance in the north, in the Gulf and the Savannah region, because we rotate, we've got really heavy conditions, we do this, we do that, we do everything. Well, that's my statement. Don't you make one either. So how wrong was I? Don't you be wrong, because if you get herbicide resistance on your doorstep, or you're having trouble with it already, you certainly need to be on your game to counteract what's going on with the weeds that are surviving with that herbicide resistance factor in them on your property. And this is what I talk about with the Weedsmart Big 6. We talk about rotating crops and pastures. We talk about mixing rotate herbicides. Boy, oh boy, are we. Some agronomists around are really, really good about mixing herbicides, like get 5 modes of action in the spray rig. And that's good, as long as they're not too antagonistic to each other, and there's a whole other issues. Crop competition, we saw it with the TIPS combination on some of these weeds, and some of these herbicide resistance weeds got a fitness penalty, they're not real strong. The crop competition, this ability to use the crop, be it row spacing or number of plants per square metre or robust plants, can really stay ahead of the pack. And the pack in this case is the weeds that you're trying to control with your herbicide. Double knockdown, we're preserving glyphosate and paraquat. Believe it or not, everybody, we've got paraquat resistance as well. And we've got a plant down here called tall fleabane. Jonesy might have mentioned it. And it's resistant to glyphosate and paraquat, the same doggone plant. So that's just wonderful. And of course, the key thing of all this sort of stuff with your weeds and with your herbicide resistance is that stopping weed seed set. Take no prisoners, absolutely. Paul McIntosh and all his clients back in the 1980s, when we're getting 90%, 95% result, not good enough. These days, we need 100%. And of course, we've got harvest weed seed control, which Michael's already talked about. So you think, okay, well, I'm going to claim control all the weeds on my place. And then we brought in a thing called area-wide management. Now, this is just a pilot program, but it's been in here around the Darling Downs, I should say. It's been in Mildura and it's been at Griffith. And what we're talking about is weeds that are not on your property, but are just outside your property line, or in the council area or in the ergon area. And that's a bit of a problem because those weeds can really build up some number of seeds and push them over into your place. And I had some great slides to show you about that stuff, but time was the key. But I just wanted to show you a thing. As weeds moved and shared, can we tackle them together? So don't just leave your neighbour tackle them, or make sure you jump in and do your set. Area-wide management approach to cropping weeds, the focus of a dedicated project. We did area-wide management of Heliothus back in the 1980s and 90s. That succeeded. Sure, we had some success with the insecticides, but certainly, you know, the introduction of BT cotton and all those things we do with integrated insect management, we can adopt to area-wide management of weeds as well. Involving different land managers working together, and that's what we need to do. You can't just use them, get rid of all the weeds on your side of the fence, or not get rid of all the weeds on your side of the fence and let them go into your neighbour's place. That's not quite working together. Key one, feather-top rows. And when I'm in a course talking about pesticide resistance, I talk about feather-top rows because it's a real painful one we've got down here. It can pump out 100,000 seeds of one plant. Germination might only be between 5 and 40%, but certainly it can pump out a lot of seed. Now, this is on the edge of road at Bongine. Now, this soil out at between Toowoomba and Dalby, between Toowoomba and Cecil Plains, I should say, real heavy black soil. It's about $9,000 an acre. That $9,000 an acre in value. You certainly don't want that pesky weed there to be inhabiting. So the council sprayed glyphosate over this. They killed all the good stuff, the other rhodes grass and all the other plants that were there. This is in front of someone's place. 2017 or something it was, and I slipped in and saw old mate. I said, mate, whatever you do, don't put any more glyphosate out there. Let the council do it. Just keep on slashing it and see what happens. Well, 3 or 4 years later, with a fair bit of rain, bingo, good old Rhodes grass ordinary's come back, and the feather-top Rhodes has departed the scene because this Rhodes grass here was a lot more competitive than this stuff here. So that was what it looked like. That's what it is now. So it's a great example about that. It's not only just herbicides, it's crop competition, it's slashing, all these mechanisms that we need to get over the top of these weeds, all plants out of place. Don't just rely on herbicides, you'll be in a bit of trouble. Thanks, Leah.
Great, thanks so much for that, Paul. Yeah, thank you again to all the presenters. Yeah, and sorry about the technical difficulties, everyone, but we got there in the end. So I hope you guys did get some value out of the presentations. And yeah, as I said earlier, it wouldn't be possible if you guys didn't obviously hang on through the technical difficulties, and yeah, for all the presenters to come. So thank you so much, everyone. Does anyone have any questions or anything before we wrap up today? No? Okay. All right, great. All right, well, thanks everyone, and we'll leave it there and have a great day.